Hey, buddy, not feeling well?
Oh my gosh, I am so tired.
Hey, what's the matter, champ?
I got the alert fatigue, bro.
Hello and welcome to You're in the Cloud. Now what? If you're joining us live, our speaker will be answering questions in the post-session discussion forum immediately following the presentation. The forum link is available in the networking lounge. For audio video issues, you can click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn it over to Charles DeBeck for the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. Very excited to talk to you today. My name is Charles DeBeck. I'm a threat intelligence expert over here at IBM. And today we're going to talk about cloud security. The main topic I want to kind of cover is, we've been telling folks that you should be moving into the cloud for a lot of reasons, but what happens once you're actually there and what concerns should you have looking at cloud environments as you move over? The main two topics we're going to cover during this presentation are, first off, how threat actors are getting into cloud environments and using cloud environments once they're in there, and then what you as an organization can do to help prepare and respond to cloud incidents more effectively. A lot of this data is based off of our internal IBM data from our incident response capability, so it's kind of cool. We can draw off of a lot of use cases that we've had to better understand what cloud environment security is looking like at this time. So before we really get into the nitty-gritty of our research, I kind of want to go back, take a step back and explain how we got to this point. So on average, organizations are about 20% of the way through their transition to cloud environments. And for anyone sort of in the security space for the last few years, we can all attest to the fact that generally organizations have been moving over to cloud environments because of all the security benefits that they offer. Excuse me. But then there's a question that comes up in my mind of, well, if we're telling everybody to move into cloud environments for all these great reasons, for scalability purposes, for centralized security and centralized data storage, what happens once everybody's there? What happens for an organization from a security perspective once you've completed or become close to completing your transition into the cloud environment? And this was really the research question that drove our efforts here, is what happens next? And so to find out more information about this, we looked at incident response data for cloud-related incidents that we observed over the previous year. So that's sort of how we got to where we are and the questions we were looking to answer. And the first question, of course, that came up was, who's targeting cloud environments? And sort of unsurprisingly, the primary answer here was cyber criminals. I think this makes a lot of sense. Realistically, cyber criminals make up the preponderance of threat actors in general. There's just a lot of cyber criminals out there. There's a lot of value to cloud environments from a cyber criminal perspective. As we continue to sort of centralize resources and capabilities in cloud environments, they're becoming more convenient and easier to secure for organizations, but they're also becoming treasure troves for cyber criminals. If you're looking for the crown jewels, generally cloud environments are where these crown jewels are moving to. So it makes sense that criminals would be targeting cloud environments as well. In addition to them being generally beneficial for criminals to target, cloud environments are becoming even easier for cyber criminals to target overall. The sophistication level required to effectively target the cloud environment is dropping because a lot of criminals are helping each other out. They're providing tutorials on underground forums and marketplaces. They're providing public cloud access keys for bargain basement prices on dark web markets. So we see a sort of an interesting combination here of the value of cloud environments is increasing, the challenge of getting into the field of targeting cloud environments is decreasing. So it sort of makes sense that we would see an influx of cyber criminals moving in this direction. That's not to say that they're the only folks that we observed. We also saw nation states targeting cloud environments as well. And these sort of advanced persistent actors, again, sort of to me, make intuitive sense to be targeting cloud environments, because as they continue to pursue their victims and pursue particular nation state interests, cloud environments will almost certainly be involved in attempting to get that information that they're looking for. So it sort of makes sense that we would see nation states continuing to be active in this area. But I'd say overall, cyber criminals still make up the majority of activity that we're observing in this space. So let's hit the first statistic that I think is really fascinating. The question is, how are threat actors getting into cloud environments? In 45% of the cases that we observed, remote exploitation of cloud applications was the initial infection vector. And I think this is sort of mind-blowing for a couple of reasons. First off, it suggests that almost a majority of the cases were the result of one infection vector primarily, remote exploitation of cloud applications. So to me, that indicates that this is a very, very popular and very, very common way for threat actors to be targeting cloud environments. It also, to me, really emphasizes the criticality and challenge of defending cloud applications. Not every cloud application is the same. There's a lot of unique snowflakes in the cloud application environment. And as a result, it becomes challenging for organizations to defend their cloud environment when they're hosting all sorts of different applications with different capabilities and different security requirements at the same time. In addition to cloud applications, another common way that threat actors got into cloud environments was through misconfigurations. And this continues to be an issue that's plaguing organizations. Over 1 billion records were lost just in 2019 due to cloud misconfiguration issues. And this is something that I think from a threat actor perspective is sort of a slam dunk. Realistically, misconfigurations are one of the easiest things for an organization for a cyber criminal to take advantage of. It requires very little sophistication. At the same time, misconfigurations are a very great way for threat actors to pull back a lot of data at once. Oftentimes when we observe cloud misconfigurations being used to pull back records, the volume of records being pulled back was significantly higher than with traditional misconfiguration issues. So we see threat actors targeting misconfigurations because they're so effective, but require so few resources and are really easy to automate. So I think this is something that has been an issue for the last year or so and will continue to be an issue into the near future. Another key component, another key way that threat actors were getting into cloud environments in our study was cross-cloud compromise, which is when threat actors break into one cloud environment and then use that initial access to break into another cloud environment. I think what's really interesting about this methodology is that it uses the fact that organizations have multiple cloud environments oftentimes in their organization to their own advantage. If I'm an organization and I know that I have two cloud environments that interact frequently for a legitimate business reason, if a threat actor breaks into one of those cloud environments and then uses that to leapfrog over to the other, it could be very difficult to detect that activity. It really challenges my internal detective controls because I'm expecting there to be traffic between those two environments. And it requires very precise, very fine-tuned detection rules. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult to find threat actors trying to use this cross-cloud attack. I think this is something that we haven't seen a lot of based on our numbers, but it is something that from an intuitive perspective on my end makes a lot of sense, and I could see this being a way that threat actors continue to try and get into cloud environments into the future. And I think this is a good chance for organizations to get in front of the 8 ball here and help protect using these detective controls internally to protect against this sort of activity. Okay, so we know who's targeting cloud environments. We know how they're getting into cloud environments. How are threat actors using these cloud environments once they're in there? Unsurprisingly, the #1 malware winner for cloud-related security incidents was ransomware. This has sort of been the most popular tune of 2020, so I don't think anybody should be super surprised to see that leading the charge here as well. And realistically, cloud environments are critical to a lot of business operations, meaning that they can't have significant downtime. What that entails is that ransomware is a great choice for threat actors compromising cloud environments, because if you can't have downtime and you're critical to the operation of the business, ransomware is a great way to have a high probability of getting a payout. So ransomware here is very, very popular across spectrums, and it's also very popular in cloud environments. Makes sense. When we saw threat actors not using persistent malware or not using sort of a persistent access mechanism, just sort of a smash and grab into a cloud environment, data theft was the most common way that they leveraged their access. And again, this is one that I think is pretty straightforward, because if you're going to smash and grab into an environment that has tons of data and tons of valuable information, and you want to be able to turn around and sell that, using data theft as a non-persistent attack is a very effective way to do that. Crypto mining also was something we observed from a malware perspective, but was nowhere near the levels of ransomware. But I think crypto mining is interesting because it really takes advantage of the vast computing resources and scalability components of cloud environments to be more effective. But when we're talking about overall numbers, ransomware very significantly outpaced crypto miners. So even though we might have seen crypto miners being used very frequently in a more traditional server-based environment, if we look at the numbers sort of across the previous year, crypto miners were much higher by comparison in traditional server environments. In cloud environments, not so much. We tended to see ransomware more significantly compared to their more traditional server counterpart. One element I also found interesting was that a lot of organizations host DNS services in cloud environments, and threat actors would actually go in and compromise these DNS servers. So essentially, they would just reroute the organization's internet traffic based on their needs. There's a lot of theoretical possibilities as to what you could do with this as a threat actor. I mean, just thinking offhand, to me, the most obvious thing would be to redirect an entire organization's user base to my exploit site, try and take advantage of browser-based vulnerabilities, and then get further penetration into the organization and onto endpoints around the organization, making it really difficult to root out my attack. In reality, what we tended to observe in these attacks tended to be DNS rerouting to advertisement sites. You know, a threat actor would set up a Google ad site or what have you and redirect a bunch of traffic to it so that they would get money. The nice thing about this attack is that it's a very short-term, quick profit attack. It doesn't require any real sophistication. It just requires that the threat actor redirects the activity to a site, and then they get money for it. It's very easy to monetize your access this way from a threat actor perspective. And if you get booted out tomorrow, well, you got the money you could, and you're fine. It's not really a long-term planning attack. So I can see why threat actors would engage in this sort of form for DNS compromise. But I think from an organizational perspective, if I'm looking at how I'm going to best protect my organization, I would really consider the risks associated with DNS compromise being significantly higher, and therefore the need to make sure that cloud-based DNS is well protected is very high in my book again. One sort of interesting trend that we observed, and this was along with our partners over in Tether, was that malware in general is evolving to target cloud environments more effectively. And this is something that I want to spend a little time on, because if I'm a threat actor, I'm not going to spend my hard-earned money or my time or my effort on malware that I don't think is going to provide value for me. I'm only going to spend all my resources on malware evolution and malware development that I think is going to ultimately make money back for me. And so what this indicates to me is that threat actors are targeting cloud environments and recognize that there's money to be made by targeting cloud environments. And so therefore, these resources being expended indicate that there's going to be a long-term interest here. This isn't just a flash in the pan targeting of cloud environments, but then next year they'll be gone. This indicates to me that threat actors are really trying to go after cloud environments in the long term. In terms of how we see malware evolving in cloud environments, there's a couple different ways. First off, threat actors are learning how they can use a cloud environment to scale their operations very quickly. They're also learning that they can use their malware to leverage cloud environments as operational infrastructure, which I think is really kind of cool. Essentially, what you do here is you infect a cloud environment, you deploy your malware within the environment, and then you can have other bits of malware call back and use the cloud environment you already infected as C2 infrastructure. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Charles, you know, threat actors have been doing this with traditional server environments for years. What's so exciting about them doing this in the cloud environment? Well, I'm glad you asked. Realistically, cloud environments have a much larger overall profile and have a much better reputational profile than traditional server environments, pound for pound. And so it becomes much more challenging, I think, to detect and spot malicious beacons going out to a cloud environment than you'd observe for a malicious environment, malicious call out to a traditional server. Because the reputational score of a cloud environment like AWS or IBM Cloud or what have you is going to be significantly greater than a random server that got popped as being used for malicious traffic. Again, a lot of these evolutions and a lot of ways we see cloud environments being used by threat actors may not necessarily, it sort of falls into one of two categories. Either the short term, let's just get money from this cloud environment and leave, or a longer term, let's use this cloud environment to our advantage. Let's take advantage of this access and compromise to make our other attacks more effective and more difficult to detect. And while I think the numbers sort of show that the smash and grab techniques, the short-term techniques, were more common and more frequent, to me personally, I think the long-term techniques of using cloud environments to make their other attacks more effective is ultimately where we're going to start seeing threat actors go as we start sort of patching the holes that are allowing these smash and grabs to happen. So that's why I'm spending a lot of time focusing on how that's evolving. So I think it's really interesting, though. We're seeing malware continue to evolve, continue to grow and become more effective in cloud environments, which I think will ultimately lead to continued cloud targeting for the foreseeable future. Okay, so at this point, you've heard, who's targeting cloud environments, how they're getting into cloud environments, what they're doing once they're in there, and you heard all the bad news. I want to change over now to the good news. What can you as an organization do to better prepare your organization for cloud-related security incidents and respond to cloud-related security incidents? On the preparation side, the number one thing I can recommend is to make sure that your organization has a cloud-specific incident response plan in place, and that this incident response plan has been tested over and over again. And a lot of organizations might say, well, I do have a ransomware incident response plan in place. But the immediate question should be, that's great, but do you have a cloud-specific ransomware incident response plan in place? Because that will be different. There will be different tools that need to be involved. There will be different partnerships that need to be leveraged depending on the nature of your relationship with your cloud provider. There will be different personnel that are pulled in for a cloud environment-based breach. And just having a ransomware incident response plan isn't sufficient to ensure that you'll be able to respond promptly. In addition to having a cloud-specific incident response plan, I highly recommend that organizations use a cloud-specific monitoring and misconfiguration checking service or capability. Pretty much what I'm trying to say here is make sure that your monitoring tools and detective tools within your cloud environment are cloud-specific. And this might seem a little bit redundant with the first one, but I think that there's a difference between having a good response plan that's cloud-specific versus having good detective controls that are cloud-specific. You might have heard me mention over and over again in the first few slides here how detective controls, I think, are absolutely critical to effectively protecting an organization against attacks and making sure that the attack is stopped as quickly as possible. And making sure that this is done in a cloud-specific fashion will ensure that will help an organization better protect themselves against cloud-related threats. In the same vein, setting up logging activity for cloud environments, I think, is very, very helpful. And logs are one of those things that it's not super interesting, right? And a lot of people are sitting there talking to themselves saying, man, I love logs. They're so cool. But they're also something you can't do after the fact, right? Once an incident has occurred or once an incident is ongoing, you can't say, man, I wish I had logs leading up to this incident. It's something you have to set up today so that when it comes up in the future, you're set to go. So taking a moment to make sure that you have effective logging set up for your cloud environment, I think, is absolutely critical so that when an incident does occur, you have those logs already set to go. And then sort of in line with the first recommendation, clearly defining the roles and processes for response is very, very helpful for organizations. Making sure everybody knows what they're doing, how they're doing it, will make it so that you're able to respond more quickly, contain the incident more effectively, and make sure you don't have overlapping responsibilities or you don't have issues of gaps in responsibilities that you didn't realize. Ultimately, most of these issues, I think, can be resolved for an organization by doing effective tabletop exercises or by doing effective cyber range exercises involving cloud environments. I know it's something that a lot of people may not have experience with or may not be something that's approachable for all organizations, but if you can do a cyber range exercise, I think it's something that's very, very beneficial because it allows your organization to approach a cloud-based incident from a tactical and operational level, not just a strategic level like you would traditionally see in a tabletop exercise, but really at a lower level and make sure that the individual operators are more keenly aware of how they would respond to a cloud-based incident. And that will really allow an organization to understand, what are the gaps in the armor, what issues might we have with our response plan, so we can address those in preparation for a potential incident rather than finding those out as an incident is ongoing. Okay, so that's stuff you can do ahead of time. What happens once you have a cloud-related incident? One of the things that we observe oftentimes is that organizations tend to re-image machines. They just kind of say, well, that one's infected, nuke it from orbit, let's get a new one in here and call it a day. The biggest risk and that's arguably one of the big benefits of a cloud environment, right? That you can re-image machines very, very easily, makes for simplicity and it sort of simplifies your IT infrastructure, which is one of the big perks. But from a forensic standpoint and from an incident response standpoint, you lose a lot of valuable data by just instantly re-imaging and saying, we're just going to get rid of it. Because then all the forensic artifacts that might be on that machine that could tell you what else the threat actor was doing, what the threat actor's motivations were, or where they were hoping to get to, who the threat actor might be, or what their intention might be, all of that valuable information is gone. You just got rid of it. So if you can instead isolate the system, take that data back, and redeploy instead of just re-imaging the asset, you're able to more effectively pull back that forensic data, take the information from there, and really do in-depth analysis to make sure you've ultimately addressed the issue of the incident and all the potential avenues the threat actor went down after the fact, rather than sort of wandering around in the dark, hoping that you got everything you needed to. One element of incident response that a lot of folks forget about with cloud environments is bandwidth costs. And that's simply the fact that, say you have a number of infected assets in your cloud environment, and you want to pull down all that information, all those forensics artifacts I was just talking about, and you want to pull them down so you can research them internally and figure out what happened. That is a lot of data to be pulling down, and a lot of cloud environments may charge based on the amount of data being pulled down at any given time. And suddenly you might find yourself facing massive bandwidth costs that you didn't really expect because you're pulling down a bunch of information. This is something that can definitely be handled ahead of time by looking at the contracts you have with your cloud providers, or by looking at, how can we more effectively pull down this information in a way that's cost affordable for us. But this is something that when you're responding, don't forget about this element, because this is something that if you do forget about it, it can really cost you in the end. Making sure you have the right investigative tools is absolutely critical to an effective response. And this, once more, gets back to the concept of cloud specificity. A lot of times, the tools that are used for investigations on traditional endpoints or traditional servers may not work effectively in a cloud environment, or may not work as effectively in a cloud environment. And so having the right investigative tools is very, very helpful for organizations to help make sure that they're able to respond effectively. And then there's automating incident response. And I really can't say enough how important I think automation is in effective incident response. Realistically, automation allows organizations to respond more efficiently, faster, with generally lower false positive, false negative rates to incidents than human operators oftentimes, because it's so fast they can just pull back tons and tons of valuable data. So anything you can do to automate your incident response process will help your organization better protect itself in the long run. So that concludes the overall topics I wanted to cover here, talking about our IBM Threat Security Cloud Security Landscape Report. This is a very brief covering of a 10-page report. I highly recommend you check out the entire paper if you have any additional questions. I think ultimately threat actors recognize the value of cloud environments. We see their TTPs evolving to target cloud environments more effectively. We see their malware evolving to target cloud environments more effectively. We see dark web forums and dark web marketplaces increasingly offering cloud-related services, capabilities, and access, which I think to me all spells out the fact that criminals across the board see that organizations are moving into the cloud. And based on the data that we're collecting, they're likely to continue targeting cloud environments into the near future, which means that if your organization is using a cloud environment or is thinking about using a cloud environment in the future, that you need to be aware of how these evolutions are taking place so that you can best protect yourselves at this time. And there are definitely positive steps that you can take to both prepare yourself as well as more effectively respond if a cloud environment related incident is to occur. Thank you all so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Just as a reminder, I'll be in the discussion forum available to answer any questions you have. So hop on over to the networking lounge to connect with me live. And thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the conference.